All right, all right. Welcome to the Yap Gang Scholarship Channel. Today we're going to be dealing with what time period best fits for Noah. Now, according to tradition, Noah's time is said to be about 4,400 years before present. So that would put it around the Bronze Age. I believe that this line of thinking and mode of thinking is very faulty. And the reason why it's very faulty because there are many things that you have to account for that I believe the Genesis or the biblical narrative is actually trying to establish. And one of those things is human diversification and human dispersal. 4,400 years ago, the earth was already populated and diversified. And then you have to explain language origin and then language diversification as well. And we know many of the major languages were well established during the Bronze Age. People were already speaking Austroasiatic. People were already speaking Indo-European languages. People were already speaking Afro-Asiatic languages. People were speaking click languages, so on and so forth. All these things will have to happen after Noah. So you can't put Noah 4,400 years ago. It just doesn't make sense once we look at all of the writings and the narrative. So what I'm going to present tonight is an argument for Noah existing around 100 and 200,000 years ago. And I think it corrects all of those issues and misconceptions. So with that, let's get right into it. Welcome to the channel. Subscribe to the channel. Yap Gang Scholarship. So, I'm going to load up my PowerPoint and we are going to explore this further. So, all right, as you guys should be able to see now, here's my PowerPoint here. Let's view. I'm going to read Noah, the most parsimonious explanation for Noah. Let's blow this up. So parsimonious means the best explanation, and I believe the best explanation for Noah, if he is the progenitor of all extant human beings, would to place him 100 to 200,000 years ago, instead of placing him, with the more traditional 4,400 years ago, putting him in the middle of the dynastic, well, in the beginning of the dynastic period in Egypt. There were already kingdoms established. There were already people walking around. Diversified during that time, and Noah's supposed to be the beginning of or the restart of human interactions in life. So why would you already have humans already existing, around 2400 BCE, if there was some extreme bottlenecking event known as Noah's flood? So I believe our best bet is placing him to 100 and 200,000 years ago for those reasons. And we're going to get into that. Putative Noah's prerequisites. Noah, according to the biblical narrative, is the last recent common ancestor of all extant human beings, also known as Homo sapiens sapiens. Noah's DNA would have to be at the base of the phylogenetic tree, being that he is the progenitor of all extant human beings. As a result, Noah's timeline must fall within the time frame of the ancestor of all extant human beings, circa 200 to 100,000 years ago. Is there evidence of a global bottlenecking event that heavily reduced the Earth's population? Because that's the message that we see in the biblical narrative with Noah's flood. It's basically a tale of a bottlenecking event that pretty much affected the entire globe. Again, for the traditional date for Noah at 4,400 years ago doesn't account for a bottlenecking event. The Bible says that his children, his progeny, would have to repopulate the earth. Why would they have to do that if there are already Egyptians living, the Sun people living, Japanese people living? Why would they have to do that? The earth was already populated 4,400 years ago. There was no bottlenecking event that happened 4,400 years ago, right? And if Noah lived 4,400 years ago, he couldn't be at the base of the phylogenetic tree. He could not be the root of the phylogenetic tree, which is basically, in layman's terms, saying the root of all living human beings, the ancestor of all living human beings. So here's a simplified example of a phylogenetic tree. Noah will be at the root of the tree, and all living human beings will descend from that root. You will hear this name being referred to as Y chromosomal Adam, but I would like to name it in its proper name, Y chromosomal Noah. So, examining Y chromosomal Noah, he would be the branch on the graph to the right. This is from Klyasov, which is a geneticist. He would be haplogroup alpha, or at the base of the tree, and he'll be responsible, or his progeny will be responsible for producing all of the human beings that we see today, meaning all of the haplogroups. A haplogroup is a group of individuals that share a common ancestor. All of them would come from his bloodline. As you can see, all haplogroups stem from the same ancestral father. And that point of convergence, we are calling Noah. Noah's bottleneck. The study's most startling result, perhaps, is the 9 out of 10 species on Earth today, including humans, came into being 100 to 200,000 years ago. How does one explain the fact that 90% of animal life, genetically speaking, is roughly the same age? Was there some catastrophic event 2,000 years ago that nearly wiped the slate clean? And the source for this is Sweeping Gene Survey Reveals New Facets of Evolution by Marlowe Hood on physics.org. 2018 is when this was published. So this was published around the time of a paper that came out that pointed out that almost all animals and humans have the same divergence date. They look to be roughly the same age. So what could cause this? And I'm calling this Noah's bottleneck, because there seems to be some kind of catastrophic event that affected the globe that reduced all living organisms, at least 90%. And I believe this best fits, if we're going to look at the biblical model and the biblical narrative, as being realistic and a reflection of historical record or historicity to the biblical narrative, then this will be a great candidate for what we are calling Noah's flood, as I got here deemed as Noah's bottleneck. Several convergent lines of evidence show that mitochondrial diversity in modern humans follow from sequence uniformity, followed by the accumulation of largely neutral diversity during a population expansion that began approximately 100,000 years ago. So I'm going to give some commentary here and why I'm using this date. See, according to this paper by Stoker and Thaler in 2018, that we can assume that human expansion happened around this time. Again, if the biblical narrative is to be believed, then this human expansion would have to happen after Noah's flood. Noah's flood causes a bottleneck. It reduces all Homo sapiens to just a small population. According to the scriptures, it says 8 people. Right, Noah, his 3 sons, and their wives, and through that progeny, you would repopulate the earth. So, if the expansion is estimated to happen 100,000 years ago, then that would mean Noah would have to live before this period. So let's keep reading. It says a straightforward hypothesis is that the extant populations of almost all animal species have arrived at a similar result consequent to a similar process of expansion from mitochondrial uniformity within the last 1 to several hundred thousand years. What does uniformity mean? One, meaning all lines converge to this population. And I believe this is the best candidate that we can have to explain Noah's bottleneck and the expansion that happens after the bottleneck. And the source here is why should mitochondria define species? Rockefeller.edu, Stokler, and Thaler, 2018. All right, so let's keep going. The simple hypothesis is that the same explanation offered for the sequence variation found among modern humans applies equally to modern populations of essentially all other animal species, namely that the extant population, no matter what is the current size or similarity to fossils of any age, has expanded from a mitochondrial uniformity within the past 200,000 years. In layman's terms, everything from humans to all animal populations, majority of them, have expanded within the last 200,000 years. I believe that this will be a great candidate again for Noah's bottleneck, aka Noah's flood. This is why you see a reduction in the global populations of not just humans, animals within the last 2,000 years. And again, that's the same source, Stokler and Thaler, 2018. Based on contemporary mitochondrial sequence data alone, it is impossible to distinguish an organismal bottleneck from mitochondrial Y chromosome specific lineage sorting, since both mechanisms make the same prediction of a uniform mitochondrial sequence in the past. So even if you look at Y chromosomes or mitochondrial DNA, they all converge to one line in the past. And most dates in the scientific literature is about between 100 and 200,000 years ago. This is why I'm choosing that date range for Noah. Again, that's the same paper, Stokler and Thaler, 2018. An extreme diminishment of population size followed by population expansion is the definition of a bottleneck. And I believe that that is what best describes what we read in the Genesis account. Around Genesis 9, it talks about Noah's progeny repopulating the earth. So there was a destruction. The Bible says it's the flood. The flood destroys a majority of life on earth. Noah's family is tasked with repopulating Homo sapiens. All right, so that's what a bottleneck is. It's the same source that we've been reading this entire time. The congruence of these fields support the view that modern human mitochondria and Y chromosome originated from conditions that imposed a single sequence on these genetic elements between 100 and 200,000 years ago. Contemporary sequence data cannot tell whether mitochondrial Y chromosomal clonality occurred at the same time, i.e., consistent with the extreme bottleneck of a founding pair or via sorting within a founding population of thousands that was stable for 10,000 years. So the paper is telling you it's hard to tell, but what it looks like is a bottleneck. Because before that it says it imposed a single sequence on these genetic elements between 100,000 to 200,000 years ago. A single sequence means all diversity shrunk, meaning a lot of humans or a lot of animal species basically were reduced to very small numbers and then had to repopulate their populations in the globe. Same paper, Stokler and Thaler, 2018. So when we get to the biblical account, it talks about the expansion after the bottleneck of Noah. Genesis 9, verses 8 through 11 says, Then God told Noah and his sons, I hereby confirm my covenant with you and your descendants, and with all the animals that were on the boat with you, the birds, the livestock, and all the wild animals, every living creature on earth. Yes, I am confirming my covenant with you. Never again will flood waters kill all living creatures. Never again will a flood destroy the earth. The reason why I want to bring out these scriptures because there's many people that will say, "Oh, it's a local flood," but that's not what's being described here. This is obviously a global event, and again, when we look at the genetic data, it seems to be pointing to some kind of global event. At the minimum, we can say that this is a bottlenecking event, and the Bible will be describing a bottlenecking event as well. Albeit, if you can say it's mythicized or whatnot, but with that being said, however, it is still a bottlenecking event. Again, what is the best time frame to place this bottlenecking event? 100 to 200,000 years ago, as we just read. So Noah would better fit in that time frame than the traditional Christian or Judeo-Christian outlook of putting him 4,400 years ago. So we're going to continue to read. It says Genesis 9, verses 8 through 19. The sons of Noah who came out of the boat with their fathers were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. From these three sons of Noah came all the people who now populate the earth. So again, after this bottlenecking event, Noah's children are tasked with repopulating the earth. So all extant humans will have to descend from his three sons. All right, let's continue. So, putative Noah. The present study showed that Eurasia was not the receiver, but the donor in Homo sapiens sapien evolution. The findings that Homo left Africa as erectus and returned as sapiens sapiens constitute a change in the understanding of Homo sapien evolution to one that conforms to the extensive Eurasian record of Homo sapien paleontology and archaeology. So basically, this paper is making the argument that Homo sapiens actually, derived from Eurasia. It left Africa as Homo erectus and derived from Eurasia. And the reason why this is important is because where I place the arc is not in the traditional, Armenia mountain ranges. And we're going to get to that here in a minute. So the source says reversal of human phylogeny. Homo left Africa as erectus, came back as sapiens sapiens. Arneson et al. 2020. So here's the dispersal map that comes with that paper. And if we were to believe that Noah and his children repopulated the earth, then we would have to think that some semblance of human dispersal would have to line up with that ideology. So I would place Noah somewhere in that shaded region. I would place the ark somewhere in that shaded region in the initial dispersal of Homo sapiens sapien after the reduction of human lineages and animal lineages. I will put it somewhere here. I think this is the best candidate to place Noah. And notice I'm not saying Ararat. And I think there's a great candidate for where the putative human dispersal after Noah's flood or Noah's bottlenecking event occurred. And I believe that to be the Himalayas. And I'm going to tell you why. So again, as you can see, the shaded area signifies a geographically undefined Asian, Eurasian area from which Homo sapiens sapiens dispersed. And Booty's son marked the earliest Homo sapiens sapiens exodus into Africa, followed by later Yoruba exoduses. The green tracks represent routes and signify potential routes into Southeast Asia and Oceania. So it's even having the sons, then Booty, and Yoruba dispersing from Asia. So let's keep going because this is very interesting, right? So this is from a paper that was written in 2018 by Cabrera, and it's dealing with L3, right? But it says something very interesting. It says here, the above described coincidental divergence of female and male lineages occurred during the glaciation period 70 to 100,000 years ago. Remember we read earlier that that's when we start seeing human dispersion about that time. So it is possible that cold climatic conditions force humans southwards, and that upon being confronted with the Himalayas, humans dispersed across southeastern and southwestern Asia. As you guys can see the source there, carriers of mitochondrial DNA, microhaplogroup L3 basal lineages migrated back to Africa from Asia around 70,000 years ago. Cabrera et al. 2018. The reason why I'm bringing all this up, because I believe that this is the point of convergence. I think this is around the vicinity, the area that Noah and his progeny would have been, and they would disperse from there. Remember, the scriptures are trying to describe a bottlenecking event and a human dispersal event. Because right after that, they talk about the Tower of Babel, and I believe that's a mechanism to explain early human dispersal. Where this early human dispersal happening? As we can see in this map, somewhere along the shaded area is where this human dispersal can be said to have had happened. All right, so the range has some of the planet's highest peaks, including the very highest, Mount Everest, over 100 peaks exceeding 7,200 meters, 23,600 feet in elevation lie in the Himalayas. So the highest mountain range on Earth is the Himalayas. So why is everyone looking at Ararat? Because people make the argument that, oh, Ararat is the highest. That's why we're claiming that. But actually, the highest mountain range on the planet is in the Himalayas. Genesis 8:3-5 says, so the flood waters gradually receded from the earth after 150 days, exactly 5 months from the time of the flood began, and the boat came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. 2.5 months later, as the waters continued to go down, other mountains' peaks became visible. So when it says other mountains' peaks became visible, many people interpret that to mean that whatever mountain that this rested on was higher than all the other mountains because the earth was still covered in water. So they were able to land first on some kind of mountain range, and then after days expired, they were able to see the other mountain peaks. So wherever they were higher than other mountain peaks. And people will say, oh, this has to be a high mountain. And if you're dealing with the highest mountain, it's not in Armenia, it's in the Himalayas. So I go on the right here. It says the best candidate for this mountain range would be the Himalayas due to the fact of it being the highest mountain range on the planet Earth. The Ararat and Turkey tradition started with Armenian Christians in the Middle Ages. So people started to apply this Ararat concept to the Armenian mountain ranges during the Middle Ages. But I think the best candidate for this mountain range will be the Himalayas. We can place the Homo sapiens sapiens dispersal there. We can show certain haplogroups possibly being derived there. So I think it makes it a great candidate for it. It says placing the ark in the Himalayas puts the Homo sapiens sapiens dispersal around that vicinity, as we see here in the map. All right. So let's move on to the language argument, because again, the Tower of Babel is another mechanism or impetus that the ancient writers are trying to employ to show that language was converged at one point, was all one at one point, uniform, and then diverged. And many linguists believe that to be the case, that languages were all uniform. And if we look at the date of this time, it goes back to 150 to 200,000 years old. As the source states, it says because all human groups have language itself, or at least the capacity for it, is probably at least 150 to 200,000 years old. This conclusion is backed up by evidence of abstract and symbolic behavior in these early modern humans, taking the form of engravings on red oak. And this is from Q&A, what is a human lineage, when did it evolve, and why should we care? So let's go to Genesis 11 1-9. Genesis 11 1-9, if you guys are not familiar with it, it's discussing the Tower of Babel concept. Many people will say, "Oh, it's a myth, it's a science description." Be that as it may, it's still trying to explain language diversification and development. So this helps us place Noah's timeline to about 100 to 200,000 years ago. Placing Noah in the traditional 4,400 year ago setting will not account for the amount of time needed to develop all language groups, such as Afroasiatic, Austroasiatic, Proto-Indo-European, etc. There's also not enough time to explain human diversity. Asians, Australians, Europeans, Africans, etc. So anyone placing Noah 4,400 years ago, that's about 2,400 BCE, somewhere around that time, that doesn't explain human diversity, because human diversity is supposed to come after Noah. It's supposed to come from his progeny. It's supposed to be a direct product of his progeny. You can't place them there. And then languages. How do you have all these language groups existing before Noah? Doesn't make any sense. Language diversification, according to the biblical narrative, happens after Noah, not before Noah. And about 4,400 years ago, Afroasiatic is already established. Austroasiatic is already established. Proto-Indo-European, so on and so forth, is already established. So I think a better time frame for Noah would be between 100 and 200,000 years ago. And here's my summation to the entire argument here for putative Noah and when did he exist. Noah would have to be placed 100 to 200,000 years ago for the following reasons. Noah's progeny is stated to repopulate the earth. This would mean all human groups will converge to Noah's lineage, which makes Noah Y chromosomal Adam. The origin of languages would stem back to 100 to 200,000 years ago, which would be in line with the biblical narrative. Remember, as we read, Noah's progeny is established, and then this concept of the Tower of Babel is established in Genesis 11. And that's where they use that as an impetus to explain the diversification of languages, therefore putting that event after Noah, not before Noah. And this seems to be the best evidence to corroborate this, seems to date back between 100 and 200,000 years as well. Also, a possible bottleneck, Noah's flood, that greatly reduced almost all animal species occurred 100 and 200,000 years ago. The date of Noah's flood being 4,400 years ago is irreconcilable with all things considered: human diversification, universal bottlenecking, language diversification, as we covered in this video. So I believe the best argument for Noah would be in an older date, between 100 and 200,000 years ago. I think that's the best parsimonious explanation for a putative Noah, is to put him during that time. Again, that will put him at the base of the human phylogenetic tree. That will put him before the diversification of languages. That will put him before the diversification of humans. So I think it's the best explanation to harmonize what we see in the scriptures with the available data. Albeit I am not omniscient, I'm giving you my perception on what makes the most sense. I would like to thank you guys for viewing the video. Drop a like, drop a comment. If you guys agree, disagree, let us know in the comments. We welcome you to the Yap Gang Scholarship channel. There will be more exclusive content like this, where we discuss the hard topics. We'll do a follow-up video with the progeny of Noah and who we believe are the children of Noah, and how do we parse them out on the phylogenetic tree. With that, I'm going to say shalom. I appreciate everyone who stopped by, share the video on the social media platforms, and subscribe to Yap Gang Scholarship channel via YouTube, and join the Yap Gang Scholarship group on Facebook. All right, we out of here. One love.